Very good morning to all the students. We will discuss today another grouping called BRICS. Yesterday, we have seen the multilateral organization called SARC that consists of our neighborhood and our South Asian continent. This grouping, BRICS, today we are going to discuss that is basically a global representative group which consists of different regions and countries. As the name suggests, this group has important countries like Russia, India, and China. So it has so much of weight it as it is in its name, and also in the examination, it is very important. So let us begin our discussion. First, let us see the location of the BRICS. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa in the order of this acronym BRICS. And Brazil is the largest country in South America in the terms of size, and we have Amazon forest, which is the largest uh, ecosystem of environment in South America. And we have African continent representation from South Africa. We have India, which is the largest subcontinent and has huge population as well as economy growing exponentially from 2 decades, and China, which has been growing as an economy since 1970s, and now it is competing with China, competing with US. So China is important as a continent and as a representation because Russia and China are important members as a P5 members in the UN. So Russia is also an important member, a competitor to US till the end of Cold War. Even now, Russia has been emerging. Since 2010, Russia has been facing with so many issues like economic downturn, but Russia is growing. It has huge say in all the matters of world peace and security. So because of these countries like Russia, China, India, this grouping has huge significance and weightage, even in the examination, even in the perspective of world groupings. So this is about the location. We have to remember about the location of these countries, and when we see the map, it represents all the south nations like China, India, and it has African representation of South Africa, and it's a South American representation from Brazil. So we can say it is a south grouping and the representation from southern countries. So we have to remember this important point. It consists of 5 countries. Introduction. First, we'll know the what is BRICS, and BRICS is an informal group consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which has different global representation. So it is a group that has come to force in 2010. It's only a decade. It's a new grouping, and BRICS Leader Summit is convened annually. So there is a summit that consists of BRICS nations. That summit is held annually. It is not an informal organization, but it's a grouping that has huge say, and BRICS grouping is important regarding the bilateral relations among these individual nations. Suppose China and India can discuss their bilateral relations or relations between them with the sidelines of this grouping. So BRICS outcome or BRICS nations decisions will directly impact these nations bilateral relations. So China and India relations will have say in this BRICS grouping, and also the other way. BRICS decisions will impact the relations between these nations. So its annual summit is held annually between supreme leaders of 5 nations. So the summit is held between these nations, and that summit will be represented not by the generals like foreign ministers or officers, but directly by the leaders of these nations. And the chairmanship of this forum is rotated annually among the members. So each and every year, the chairmanship of the summit will go from one country to other country in accordance with the acronym. First, chairman will be from Brazil, next from Russia, and so on so forth. Together, the BRICS accounts for 42% of world population. China and India has huge population, so together when we talk about this BRICS grouping, it has huge population, almost 50% of world population. It means it has exactly 42% of world population, and together it consists of 23% of global GDP. China's GDP is growing exponentially because of its export, because of its market size, and India's also. And the basic essence of this grouping is because they are formed on the platform called emerging economies. Economy is the main reason that this grouping has come to existence. So they have 17% of world trade. World trade for this grouping is also important. It occupies 17% of total world trade it has. And it is a critical economic engine. So if China and India collapse, there will be no growth in the world. Now, after 20th century, we have entered the 21st century. Now the growth is not from Europe. They all are developed nations, and they have settled with uh, their development. They are not growing, they are stagnant. So now the growth story is from Asian economies. Asian economies consist of China, India, big economies, and ASEAN nations. These ASEAN nations has growing exponentially, and they are fueling world trade. So majority of exports come from China. If China doesn't export, the dependence on China will make uh, world demand and supply chains will fall off. So these Asian nations are very important in 21st century where the economy is growing. So it is a critical economic engine. If these economies doesn't perform, the world economic growth will be less, and there will be conditions like depression or like in 2008 crisis uh, where there is recession. And these five nations account for 50% of world economic growth. Economic growth, when we see from the world, when we see for the world, 50% of growth comes from these nations, and 27% of world area. They occupy 27% of world area and 13.24% of World Bank voting power. So in World Bank, there is a voting. So in the Bretton Woods institutions like World Bank and IMF, when I say Bretton Woods institutions, Bretton Woods means it's a name for these institutions. World Bank and IMF are called Bretton Woods institutions, and these institutions have voting power according to the contribution of a country. Suppose if India contribute more, they have more voting power. It is not equal voting power. So combinedly, this BRICS five nations of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa consists of 13.24% of World Bank voting power, depicted as counterweight to China, counterweight to G7. So this G7 is a grouping. It consists of developed nations like Italy, US, Canada, Germany, UK, France, and Japan. So this G7 has formed because of its economic power, because it represents the developed nations. They discuss about economic issues. They have huge economies at the time of the formation of the G7. So it is this G7, the group that time in 1970s, to discuss economic affairs, to discuss the world economy. This G7 has become an important group which has global economic powers. Now from the 1970s, the times have been changing. When we come to 2000 and 2008, there is a growing uh, economy, not from this G7 nations like Italy, Japan, US, Canada, Germany, which are nations of G7, but from the nations of Brazil and India, China. These nations are growing more than the G7 nations. So it is seen as a counterweight to G7. The these G7 is a combine of developed economies, as I told before. And now the BRICS nation is to has come to balance this G7, and it represents the world top emerging economies and claims to serve as a bridge between the developed and the developing world. Already these nations of G7 and other European nations have already developed, and their economic growth have become stagnant. They are no more growing. They are already grown economies. Now the Asian now the emerging it's 21st century is all about the growth of Asian economies like Russia, India, and China. So the BRICS has become very important and alternative to G7 recently. So it acts as a bridge between the developed and the developing world. From 2010, South Africa has joined the summits of BRIC and has become BRICS together, all five nations, and every year they'll hold summits and meetings represented by their leaders of nations. And recently, in the recent past, there is a 11th summit that is held in 2019, and the theme was BRICS Economic Growth for Innovative Future. And they discuss about economic growth or economic issues that are concerned for the world and world financial system, and also any issues that are concerning these nations. They can discuss about poverty, they can discuss about developmental issues of these nations, and also they can discuss any issue based on the situation of that year. They can also discuss about the sustainable developmental goals. So it has a overarching features regarding any issues they can discuss, and their main theme is about the economy that we have to remember, because they are found based on because they are emerging nations. And the 12th BRICS summit that is held in Russia under the slogan Partnership for Global Stability, Common Security, Innovative Growth. So in 2021, yesterday we have seen the news. India is a chair of BRICS summit that will be held in this September 2021. That is not yet hold. This 13th summit is not yet hold, but yesterday there is a virtual meeting of all these nations, and they have discussed some important issues that I will discuss in the later parts of this video. What are the important decisions that they discussed yesterday? That's a virtual meeting. Original summit will be held in September of this year, and that is chaired by India. So when we see the formation and the history of this BRICS grouping, the, the acronym of BRICS. So the first initial steps of the formation of BRICS have been formulated in 2001 by economist Jim O'Neill of Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is an investment company, and Jim O'Neill is an economist, and he is the first person who gave the report about BRICS nations, how they are growing, what is the growth story from 2000, how they will be economic uh, powers in 21st century. So based on this report, these nations were encouraged to form a group called BRICS, and because they represent a significant share of world production and also population. So they have huge economic engines. China exports to half of the world trade. It exports to it gives its exports to all the nations, so it has huge production power. India is also producing more of goods, but exports are not that great. India's exports are not that great, but when we see combinedly, these nations are growing exponentially. So based on that growth, these BRICS nations have been formulated and coined by Jim O'Neill, and based on his report, the BRICS nations are encouraged to form a group and they are formed to discuss the world trade, world economy. In 2006, four countries had a regular informal diplomatic coordination with annual meetings of foreign ministers at the margins of general debate of UN General Assembly. So every year there will be a meeting of General Assembly. On the sidelines of this General Assembly in 2006, these four countries of Brazil, Russia, India, China has hold their first informal meeting consists of foreign ministers. This tells about the history of formation of a group called BRICS. This successful interaction led to the decision that dialogues was to be carried out at the level of head of state and government in annual summit. So then in 2004, what they did is these four countries except South Africa, they have decided to conduct the summit, the annual meetings, not by the ministers but by the actual presidents or prime ministers of these nations annually. This first BRICS summit took place in 2009, subsequently in Russia, and focused on issues such as reform of the global financial architecture. So the first foundation, first reason why they formed is about their growing economies. So the main agenda is to reform the global financial architecture, to see the issues in global financial architecture or in the world economy. It is a counter to G7 group, which have grown before and now they are not growing. It is now the new nations like BRICS have been growing, so it is seen as a counterweight and alternative to G7 nations to discuss about the global finances and economic relations. South Africa was invited to join the BRICS in December 2010. So South Africa is a later entry in 2007, and it has finally become BRICS. South Africa subsequently attended the third summit in China. So in 2007, 2010 it entered, and in 2011 they attended a summit in China. So the areas of cooperation among these nations go beyond the reforming financial institutions regarding economy for which they have been formed. They are emerging economies. They should discuss about the economy, but they have expanded the areas of cooperation from the economy. So they also discuss the political cooperation, policy advisors. There are policies that need to be made between these nations. There are some policies regarding innovations like 5G, where 5G is banned in the countries like USA. So because of this BRICS nations collaborations, they can discuss the policies like 5G policy or data protection policies, because there are MNCs from one country to other country that operates. So they discuss about such policy issues to protect each own country's data, to discuss the policies like security policies, common security goals and all. So they also provide BRICS also provide opportunities for sharing policy advice and exchange the best practices that are performed in the domestic areas, and they also discuss about the regional challenges as well as they discuss the restructuring of political architecture and security architecture. Suppose there for example, when I take the bilateral issues between India and China, there is a security concern, there is a border tensions between. Even in 2020 we have seen how hot springs, Galwan Valley, Pangong Tso Lake between India and China along the line of control have been violated by the militaries of China. So we'll discuss such policies, such bilateral issues of security among these nations, and how to establish peace and security among both. So we will discuss about the South and South cooperation. South and South cooperation is there is a concept in the IR that North and South divide that's present in the world. All the northern countries of America, Europe, they have developed exponentially during 20th century, but southern nations were not developed in 20th century. They were in poverty in 1980s and 1990s. They were in poverty, but in 21st century from 2000 they were growing exponentially. So they discuss the growth of the southern to south nations and the cooperation between the northern world and the southern world. So there is a BRICS outreach dialogue also. These outreach dialogues were platforms for innovative thinking, giving suggestions to world leaders in actual summit. So encourage the discussion. They encourage the discussions regarding any issues that are concerned to these nations. And the second concept is about economic cooperation. So they discuss about trade, innovation, customs, and business council meetings in the economic cooperation. So in any cooperation, if in the IR we can talk about various instruments of diplomacy that we need to understand. So there is a track on diplomacy that talks about formal diplomacy between nations. Sup- in diplomacy means the relation between countries, how they talk. Track on diplomacy includes where national leaders or and the national supreme leaders of nations meet and talk and increase their relations. Track 2 diplomacy means where institutions, state-owned enterprises or business organizations that are present in these nations, they discuss about how to collaborate between these nations, how to collaborate between these institutions. They discuss and increase the relations between the countries. That is track 2 diplomacy. And track 3 diplomacy is about civil society and people to people engagement. So people to people, when they have huge cultural relations, or civil societies, they have common agenda, they collaborate and increase the bilateral relations between the countries. So the political cooperation, economic cooperation, all these cooperation come from all the three ways of diplomacy. From track 1, the national leaders meeting and discussing issues. Track 2, where business leaders and organization or state governments and sub organizations in the country which are important, they discuss about the relations, they discuss about the cooperation among the nations. And track 3, diplomacy, where people to people cooperation among these nations increases through people going and working in these nations, and they develop contact, personal contact, like cultural contact, common religion and culture. So that is track 3 diplomacy. So when it comes to economic cooperation, there is a trade. They discuss about the concession and trade. They make so many agreements. There are concessional agreements between the countries to eliminate customs duty, to eliminate duties that impact trade between the countries. So there is a they discuss about innovation regarding the countries. And two, because some countries like South Africa, they don't have innovation, so they discuss about transfer of technology from one country to another country. We discuss about the cooperation in technology, like India and China. There is a China, they have manufactured active pharmaceutical ingredients which are very much important in making medicine. So we import active pharmaceutical ingredients from China, which are the basic particle of medicines, and we produce medicines here by importing active pharmaceutical ingredients. So they discuss about such innovative things in this cooperation, and they conduct business council meetings, and also they form new development bank. New development bank is an important institution, so they have specific agenda for this new development bank, which I will discuss specially this bank in another slide. So they developed this banking architecture to help these nations out. So there's a people to people cooperation where there is a they conduct this young diplomats forum where young people come and discuss the relation between countries. They give suggestions, they explore other areas of cooperation in these summits like outreach dialogues and business council meetings and diplomat forum. These are all background diplomacy that will go in making actual diplomacy among these countries. So they discuss about increasing common culture among these nations and increasing sports in the area of sports regarding education and research cooperation we discuss. And there is a cooperation in economic area, and they form the BRICS education organization is also present in China, where it attracts students from these five nations, and there is a research cooperation among these students from all these nations. So these are the areas of cooperation which they have collaborated on. So most important success in the areas of cooperation where all these five nations have collaborated is in the formation of New Development Bank. New Development Bank has a huge goal, has an important goal, and has attracted all the world nations eyes on this New Development Bank. That is, this bank has become the success story of this organization called BRICS. BRICS is a successful organization where there are powerful countries, and they formed a bank which is alternative to banks like IMF and World Bank. So it is very important this to remember the importance of this New Development Bank and various issues of this New Development Bank. That questions will be asked in the prelims examination about the New Development Bank and how this New Development Bank need to be strengthened. That in that way the questions will also be asked in the mains examination. So New Development Bank is important, and whenever we study a bank in IR, whenever we study a bank of multilateral institutions like there is a Asian Development Bank, there is a Asian Infrastructure uh, and Investment Bank, AIIB or ADB, and there is an NDB Bank. So we have to understand the differences between the banks that are developed by the countries, and we have to know the significance of this to answer the question in examination. So we will discuss this New Development Bank that is formed by BRICS, or we can call this New Development Bank as BRICS Bank also. So this New Development Bank is headquartered in China, that is in Shanghai, and this New Development Bank have been formed at the BRICS Summit that is held in 2012. That is a time when the nations have discussed the possibility of setting up a new development bank to mobilize the resources for infrastructure, sustainable development projects in the BRICS countries. So they form a bank to collaborate, to invest in their own nations. These own nations, they formed a bank for developing infrastructure and to initiate the sustainable development projects on means like on education, like on renewable energy, solar energy, etc. So these are the emerging nations, and they form the develop new development bank, and this new development bank will invest in emerging economies as well as in developing countries as well. So this new development bank does not only invest in their own nations, like new development banks can invest in other nations also. Suppose countries like Nigeria or countries like Bangladesh, they can invest in these banks also if the countries ask for so. During the sixth BRICS summit in Fortaleza 2014, so leaders signed the agreement establishing the new development bank. So in the fourth summit, we discussed about the formation of bank in New Delhi, and in the sixth summit, after 2 years, by signing this Fortaleza Declaration. This Declaration is important because the questions will be asked in the examination on by which declaration new development bank is formed. Fortaleza Declaration or Quindao Declaration. We should answer the Fortaleza Declaration. So such declaration, such name should be remembered. Fortaleza Declaration stressed that new development bank will strengthen cooperation among BRICS countries, and it will supplement the efforts of multilateral and regional financial institutions for global development, thus contributing to sustainable and balanced growth. So they invest in these institutions, and they will supplement the other multilateral and regional financial institutions. Like there are regional financial institutions like Asian Development Bank, Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. These banks are also formed by countries, few countries. So these are multilateral. If anything that is done by group of countries, that become multilateralism, that becomes multilateral entities. So this new development bank is also a multilateral bank. So it will supplement those efforts that are already being done by the multilateral banks, other multilateral banks. So new development banks key areas of operation are clean energy. Sustainable development means it will invest in climate, it will invest in infrastructure, education. So transport infrastructure, irrigation, sustainable urban development and economic cooperation among the member countries. So they invest in these areas. So the NDB functions on a consultative mechanism among the BRICS members, with all the member country possessing equal rights. So they have an NDB is a bank that is alternative to Bretton Woods institutions like IMF and World Bank. What happens in IMF and World Bank is there is inequality. This IMF and World Bank have voting rights or quota rights. They are not equal. Suppose if a developing country like US have contributed more in this World Bank or IMF, World Bank is dominated by US, and IMF International Monetary Fund, that is developed by, that is dominated by European countries. So whenever because their contribution, they are developed countries, their contribution towards this World Bank and IMF are more. So they have high voting power. They don't have equal voting power among the nations. So what they do is World Bank and IMF are biased. So they cooperate only for these developed nations. They do actions according to the policies of these nations. They are not their main agenda is not to help other nations. They do certain projects, World Bank do certain projects, but main influence is coming from these developed nations. So whenever a country goes for a loan for this Bretton Woods institutions like World Bank and IMF, there are many conditions that are attached to follow for any nation. They ask them, suppose if a socialist country, suppose if a country follows socialism like Russia, if a country go to IMF because it is in the crisis, economic crisis, the IMF and World Bank ask these nations to follow certain measures like liberalization, privatization and globalization to make these reforms. Until and unless they make these reforms, they don't give the loans. So they have common goals that is influenced and dominated by countries like capitalist countries like US. So new development bank is an alternative to all this. Their main aim is to give loans at a cheaper cost to these nations, and to develop these their own nations of BRICS. So they have contingency reserve arrangement. They have contributed $100 billion. They have equal voting rights. So they don't have there's no one country domination in the new development bank. So they have contingency reserves mm, that are invested in the countries based on the equal decision. Each and every country have only one vote. So this is a speciality of the New Development Bank. After the New Development Bank will discuss the news that is present from 2 days in the newspapers, that there is a BRICS virtual summit that have been held by the foreign ministers. First time they have agreed on a joint statement. First, all the five countries have agreed on their common goal to reform the multilateral system. Multilateral system means all the countries, some countries, or all the countries that will come together and they work together for their common agendas and common goals. So multilateralism is a new mechanism from 2000s in the subject of IR, where countries collaborate on various issues and coordinate on various issues. Unilateralism we have been seeing now, during the time of Trump. We have seen it more in 2020, 2018. We have seen that, where only one country that take decisions for the rest of the country, the decisions of one country that impact other nations in a bad way, they take selfish decisions. That is called unilateralism. What US have done in the time of Trump is it didn't appoint members to WTO. It threatened multilateral institutions like WTO, WHO. They didn't you They also started a trade war with China. So even Trump has withdrawn from Trans-Pacific Partnership, that is a multilateral economic cooperation like RCEP, Regional Cooperation for Economic Partnership, that is signed between China and other five nations with 10 ASEAN nations. India dropped out of RCEP, if you know about RCEP. So there is a threat to these multilateral institutions very lately, and these multilateral institutions like WHO, we have seen how WHO is ineffective in controlling the virus. Into 2020, we have seen so much of criticism that is slammed against WHO because it didn't ask China to stop international travels. It declared the virus as a pandemic very lately in 2020. So there is a question mark on these multilateral institutions, how they are working. They are not working properly. So there is a need to reform all the multilateral institutions to make them work for their own agendas by which they formed. Even the Bretton Woods institutions like IMF and World Bank, they need to be reformed. They need to be equal. There should not be so much of influence of Western powers. That is why, because there are no reforms. There are no reforms in UNSC. We have seen in the UN lecture, first lecture, that UN is dominated by P5 members. So there need to be a reform. So first time BRICS nations in the virtual meeting, they have agreed for reforming the multilateral system. They have agreed to reform and to cover all key multilateral institutions, including UN and principal organs like UNSC, General Assembly, Economic Social Council, Secretariat, not only UNSC, not only Security Council and permanent membership, but also there need to be reform in this General Assembly, how they work, Economics and Social Council, how they work in Secretariat, and they have to reform this Bretton Woods institutions like IMF and World Bank, where there is so much of dominance by these own nations, by these capitalistic nations and developed nations like Europe and US. And there need to be a reform in WTO also, because even now members have not been appointed. There is a dispute settlement mechanism which is very much important, which is a core to the formation of World Trade Organization, to establish the trade rule, international trade rules, to help international growth, to help international economy to grow. But in that core institution there are inequalities. There are no members to make WTO effective. There are so many vacancies in this bodies. So there is a need for reform in the UN Council for Trade and Development, and there is a and global health governance system with WHO at its core. So we have to reform this WHO also. So, in particular, BRICS ministers agreed to instill new life in discussions on the reform of UNSC. So, BRICS institutions is very important. This point is very important. Yesterday lecture I have told we want permanent membership in the UNSC, where only 5 members are present in the UNSC. But who is dominating UNSC? Who is controlling or not supporting India for its membership in UNSC is China. So China is present here in the BRICS summit, and they have issued a statement. They have agreed to instill new life. They have agreed for reforms to represent all the nations in the UNSC and the reforms of UNSC. Even China agreed in this BRICS summit. So we can see in the future what happens in for the UNSC reforms, if whether China will agree for India's permanent membership or not. So it also expressed support for India and South Africa's TRIPS waiver. So in 2020, what India and South Africa have done in the have asked in the WTO, World Trade Organization, is they want TRIPS waiver. TRIPS is an intellectual property right. Intellectual property right means if a country, if a members of one country, or if a company of one country innovates a medicine, innovates a drug, then they have patent rights. They have patent rights for themselves. Only they can produce. But that patent rights, with the patent rights, the drug will be very costly because they have done so much of research and they have done innovation. But when the countries need those drugs which are very costly because they are patented, they are newly innovated, they are costly. So when these countries need such drugs, now it is a time for that drugs. Now it's a time for vaccinations. We don't have vaccinations, we don't have technology. We have vaccines like Covishield, but we don't have that much capacity to provide drugs like now we need essential drugs like dexamethasone and all. We are in a growing demand for drugs because these drugs are produced by these multinational companies. Now we are seeing emerging disease like black fungus, and also we need drugs. When we need drugs, that drugs should come at a less cost. So we need this intellectual property, trade related intellectual property rights waiver from WTO. So we asked all the nations to waive um, to waive this intellectual property rights for the coronavirus vaccines. So now, what recently in 1 month we have seen US extending its supports for the TRIPS waiver in WTO with regarding the proposal that India and South Africa made. Now even China, Brazil, Russia are and South Africa have been also agreeing regarding discussing regarding this TRIPS waiver, and even China agreed for the TRIPS waiver. So that we need to remember, and we should take down the point whenever these news come in the newspaper. Finally, we will see the analysis how the BRICS have been working, what all the BRICS have done, and what are the issues for the BRICS, what it means to India, and how India should role play in the BRICS. So there is a need to increase membership. So there some countries have in the BRICS have given observer status, and UN General Assembly has also given BRICS as an observer status, BRICS as an observer organization. So UNSC observed this organization. UNSC observes this organization. So we have to increase this BRICS membership also. So we have to include other like-minded countries or emerging countries in the BRICS cooperation. So we can strengthen this organization like G7, G20. There are 20 members like developed members in G20. G7, I told you, Italy, Canada, Germany, US, UK, have Japan have been present in the G7. They are strong. So like that only we are BRICS is a successful organization lately. It developed a bank also, so it needs to increase its membership. There is a need for it. And the challenge of India and China. So in the BRICS membership, there is two conflicting countries, two countries where there are tensions between them. That is India and China. There is a border dispute. There is a Kashmir issue. There is a BRI issue, Belt and Road Initiative, that is spearheaded by China in various countries. We rejected Belt and Road Initiative as it's affect our independence and sovereignty. So there are issues between these nations of India and China. That issues need not affect the BRICS organization. So BRICS organization need to collectively take all these countries together without the bilateral issues like border issues between India and China are present. So BRICS need to expand its agenda in the global order. It need to encourage other members to participate, to increase. It needs to discuss on various other issues also, and it need to prove its relevance in this global order. So it is there is a dominance of Russia, India, China. They are big countries. They are dominating South Africa and countries like Brazil, so that kind of dominance should not be seen. So they have to take these countries like Brazil and South Africa also on board regarding anything. So that dominance, like that attitude of bullying, like SARC, what other nations in the neighborhood feel about India. India is a big power, hardcore power. They feel that India is a threat to them. India will act as unilateral. They feel that there is a lack of trust, and there is an insecurity. So in this institution also, BRICS, if it needs to be successful institution, it has to have equal power. Already we have seen in the NDB there are equal power between the countries in voting rights in the bank. So this dominance of RIC should also need to be in check. So a national new development bank need to be strengthened. Furthermore, it should add more countries. It should attract more finances and multilateral institutions. India so India, with along other BRICS nations, have also reiterated its demands for reforming multilateral institutions like UNSC. We have seen in the news slide where I have told that in the news they have agreed on a common standpoint to reform these multilateral institutions, to ask these multilateral institutions and to initiate the reforms in multilateral institutions collectively as BRIC nations in the organizations like UNSC. So pandemic and TRIPS waiver. So they have to spearhead about this TRIPS waiver, because this TRIPS waiver will not only benefit India, it will benefit other developing countries like Africa, where medicines of this virus is needed. But what is happening? Only European countries which have technology, they have technology, like not only vaccines, there are many other things that are needed in the vaccine development, many other equipment that is needed in vaccine development. Those equipment should they have intellectual property rights on those equipment. So European nations are not agreeing for the TRIPS waiver. So BRICS as a collective organization, they need to ask the European nations, convince European nations for getting this TRIPS waiver for a short period of time, at least 2-3 years, until this pandemic gets over. So TRIPS waiver is comes from WTO organization. So all the countries need to agree on this TRIPS waiver. Until unless all the countries agrees on this intellectual property rights waiver, there won't be this waiver. So BRICS nations should coordinate on this, and they should deliberate on this. So there is a climate change issue. So there is a proposal from India regarding BRICS Energy Alliance that also need to be seen, and this BRICS Energy Alliance need to be formed. When this Energy Alliance is formed, they invest on projects like renewable energy. They invest on projects like hydropower, etc. And the formation of BRICS credit rating agency. So the credit rating agency, like the credit rating agency means they give points to the countries based on their economic performance. So a credit rating agency has also been discussed to formed by this BRICS countries. So that also need to be seen to be formed. So this is about the analysis and new developments regarding BRICS. Uh, So I hope you thoroughly understood the issues in BRICS and the significance of BRICS. Now we will see the prelims question regarding BRICS. We will see the questions in the examination, model questions. There are questions in the previous prelims examination also regarding New Development Bank. New Development Bank is a multilateral development bank established by BRICS states. That is true. That option one is true. That our bank is established by the BRICS states, and the state government in India can seek loan assistance from NDB. That is very much true. Any organization or any other state outside of the BRIC nations can ask for the loan assistance. So NDB is a second statement is also true. NDB can provide loan for individual state governments in the India and also other states apart from BRICS nations. And India is the second largest shareholder of NDB. This uh, third option you have to see very carefully. I have told you India has equal voting rights. India, they contributed equally, so India is not the second largest shareholder of NDB. So third option is wrong. So when we eliminate third option, we can easily choose option 1 and 2. So here option C is correct. So through elimination technique of one MCQ, we can answer the prelims questions. So the main question here is describe the need of NDB and the need to strengthen it along the BRICS. So there is a need for NDB. Why there is a need for NDB? To develop the project in individual countries to stop the domination of Bretton Woods institutions like World Bank and IMF. So that's the need of NDB. So there is a need to strengthen NDB by attracting all the nations. There is a need to strengthen BRICS also because it is an important multilateral organization where even the bilateral issues are solved. This is how, through the analysis that I explained before, you can provide various points in your support to answer this main question in 250 words. I hope today you understood the BRICS nation in detail. So tomorrow we'll see another grouping or another organization. Thank you.